Welcome to the final episode of Treasures from the Rabbi's Library. I say final, I hope it's not final, but it's the final episode of the third series, which we began at the beginning of COVID. And in the spring, I was going to say it a little bit later on, or after the winter break, we're going to start a new series of Jewish history lectures. It's going to be slightly different. This final episode is sponsored by an anonymous donor in honor or at least for the Refuah Shalema, in the schus of a Refuah Shalema for Yaakov Koppel ben Sora. And we should all daven for Refuah Shalema for Yaakov Koppel ben Sora. Mitzvah Hashem, he should get better. B'mehirus, he should get better quickly. And we should hear B'suras Tovus. The Tosfos Yomtov, Rav Yomtov Lipman Heller, if actually his full name was Gershon Shol Yomtov Lipman ben Nosson Halevi Heller. It's quite a mouthful. He has a very interesting chiddush regarding an unusual halacha. In Maseches Brachos Perek Hey Mishnah Gimel, Chazal tell us this: Ha'omer al kan tzipor yagiu rachmecha meshaskin oisoi. If someone says, just as Hashem's mercy extends to a bird's nest with the mitzvah of Shiluach HaKan, when God commands us to send away the mother before taking her chicks or the eggs, so too he should extend his mercy to us. Now, if you hear that from someone, you have to tell that person to be quiet. In other words, tell them that they're not allowed to say it. The language of the Mishnah is a little bit ambiguous. But the Tosfos Yomtov is expanding on something that Rashi and the Rambam say. He defines the meaning as follows. Listen to this. The Tamehu, that the restriction only applies to someone who is praying, who is davening. If they're praying and they say it, you need to tell them not to say it. But if someone wants to use these words as a way of explaining the mitzvah, that's no problem at all. And I think you'll agree that this is quite a chiddush, right? How did the Tosfos Yomtov know that it's okay to say it as a drosh, as a pshat, but not as a tefillah? It's quite curious and quite odd. So the Tosfos Yomtov is not basing himself on something which he made up himself. He's basing it on a Gemara. He's basing it on a Gemara which is in Bobover Rebbe, if I remember correctly. It's in Daf Pei Beis, Omid Beis. In 1956, just over 2 years after the tercentenary of the Tosfos Yomtov's death, a little pamphlet came out about him. And here's the pamphlet. It's signed by the author. The copy I have is signed by the author, and it's called Simchas Yomtov. Here's the title page. Hold on, it's upside down. Here's the title page of Simchas Yomtov. The pamphlet begins with the chiddush that I just shared with you and offers a compelling backdrop, which explains how the Tosfos Yomtov had the courage to come up with such a chiddush. Listen to what he says. It's truly amazing. The Gemara in Bobover Rebbe, Daf Pei Beis, has an interesting discussion regarding bikurim. What happens if you send your bikurim produce with someone? You ask him to take your place, and he dies on the way to Yerushalayim. Rabbi Yosef ben Chanina says that someone else brings the bikurim for you, but that person can't make the declaration. Higadati hayoim l'Hashem Elokecha ki vosi el haaretz asher nishba. He can't make the declaration. It's not possible. You know why? Because the mitzvah specifically instructs v'lakachta v'hevesa. You shall take and you shall bring. And in this situation, the person who is bringing it didn't actually take it. Now, on the spot in the Gemara, Rav Acha suggests an ingenious solution to Rav Ashi, a solution which would allow the new guy to say the declaration. Since it's made up of psukim in the Torah, says Rav Acha, let him just read the psukim of the declaration from a Sefer Torah. Then it's fine. I mean, what's wrong with reading psukim from the Torah? It's a great suggestion, right? Wrong. It's a terrible suggestion. Says Rav Ashi, Amalei mishum de michzek shikra. Rav Ashi says you can't do it that way because it has the appearance of lying, because it looks like the guy saying the declaration is being dishonest, because what he's saying isn't true, because he didn't take it and he didn't bring it, because it didn't grow on his land, etc., etc. The Rashbam there in Bobover Rebbe says that when you're saying the declaration for Bikurim purposes, even if you're reading it from the Torah, The fact that the purpose of saying it is not reading from the Torah, and that you seem to be saying something certain about the Bikurim fruit that doesn't actually apply to you, that means that it sounds like you're lying. But if you would just be reading it from the Torah, even if what you're saying doesn't apply, it's not relevant to you, it's not called lying, and then it's fine. So, now, the author of this Simchas Yomtov, I haven't told you yet who the author is, the author of Simchas Yomtov, he takes this Chiddush, and he says that this idea can be applied to the Tosfos Yomtov's Chiddush as well. When someone is davening, he says, and they say, Al kan tzipor yagiu rachmecha, it sounds like they have concluded that this is a fact. In other words, that the reason the bird is sent away is because Hashem has pity on them. And this is what is forbidden. Do you know why? Because you don't know that for sure. You don't know for sure that that's why Hashem wants to do it, wants you to do it that way. And you can't include falsehoods in your prayers. But if you say it because you're working up pshat in the pasuk, or you're saying it for drush purposes, then it's speculative, not certainty, which doesn't have the shadow of the Michzika Shikra. And just by the way, the author of Simchas Yomtov also rips the Shagas Aryeh to pieces for his misreading of the Rashbam on that Gemara in Baba Basra. All of that in just the opening page of this pamphlet. I'm talking about the first few lines of the pamphlet. And there's page after page of this incredible material, this incredible stuff, presented as biography, but in reality it's a deep dive into the Tosfos Yomtov by someone who is not a historian in any basic understanding of that word, but instead this author is a massive Talmud Chacham, a world-class Torah scholar, with the confidence of one of the greatest in the generation, a Gadol Hador. And do you know why that is? Because that's exactly what he was. Even if you've never heard of him, he was a Gadol Hador in Shas and Poskim, one of the leading Rabbonim and Dayanim of Europe before the Second World War, and one of the leading Dayanim and Rabbonim of Eretz Yisrael after the creation of the State of Israel. His name, Harav Mushulem Rot. Here is a picture of him. He was born in 1875. He was a Tzartik of the Chassid. He learned at the yeshiva. He learned at the yeshiva in Chabin. He learned his Rebbe was Rabbi Yaakov Weidenfeld. His Chavrusa was the Chabiner Rav. That was the Chabiner Rosh Yeshiva's son, Rav Dov Berish Weidenfeld. Later on, he became the Chabiner Rav, with whom he had a relationship until the end of his life. He became a Rav at the age of 22. He got married at 18. And although he was the Rav of Chorostakov, the Hoziatin and Hasidim there wouldn't accept him. They appointed another rabbi, but he was the Rav there. After serving as rabbi in a couple of other places, including Shotz, he became the Rav of Chernovitz, where he opened a yeshiva, a very famous yeshiva. He was one of the foremost poskim of the interwar years, widely respected, widely consulted by everybody, by the greatest rabbonim of the time. His wife died, and he remarried to the daughter of Reb Pinchas Menachem Mendel Rubin of Seret, one of the Admorim in Bukovina. And one of his greatest fans, as I said, was the Chabiner Rav, Rav Dov Berish Weidenfeld, who adored him and respected him greatly. So he is the author of the pamphlet that I've been showing you, and it's a fascinating pamphlet with a dedication. Now, if you haven't heard of him, the reason is simple. The reason you haven't heard of Rav Mushulem Rot is he was an ardent Zionist, not a latecomer, like a supporter of Zionism when the State of Israel was established, but very early on, really early on. He was openly supportive of Zionism from the 1890s, and he went to Zionist congresses. He was a member of Mizrahi. He openly advocated support for Zionism, even when his colleagues criticized Zionism. He came to Eretz Yisrael after the Nazis invaded. He actually managed to escape from Chernovitz. He came to Bucharest. He managed to escape in 1944, came to Eretz Yisrael, and he quickly rose to the top of the rabbinic world in Eretz Yisrael. He was a dayan on the Beis Din HaGadol and a very close friend of Harav Yitzchak Isaac Halevi Herzog. He famously wrote a tshuva paskening that one should say Hallel on Yom Ha'atzmaut, although he didn't say that one should add a bracha, suggesting that one needs a consensus, a rabbinic consensus for that. When someone asked Rav Tzvi Yehuda Kook, who is the Gadol Hadar after your father, Rabbi Avram Yitzchak HaKohen Kook, died? Do you know what he answered? He said the answer is very simple. He didn't hesitate. Rav Mushulem wrote. That's what he said. Now, do you remember on another episode of Treasures, I spoke about Rav Nosson Tzvi Friedman, the rabbi who made a controversial psak about turning off a gas switch on Yom Tov that then leads to a fire going out. Here is a photo of him. It's a photo of him when he was a younger man. I have another photo here of him when he was an older person. He was the Rav of Shikun Hay in Bnei Brak. And I have a book that he compiled that I use constantly. It's called Oitzer Harabonim. It is the most comprehensive list of rabbis that's ever been compiled. It's with their names, where they lived, when they were born, when they died, 3 or 4 words about them. Everyone uses this book. Even the most anti-Zionist Kanoim use this book, Oitzer Harabonim. If only they knew that the author said Hallel with a bracha on Yom Ha'atzmaut, I wonder if they would use it. Just saying. By the way, if you don't have it and you're into the details of Jewish history like I am, get your hands on this book. It is a must-have reference tool. Oitzer Harabonim by Rav Nosson Tzvi Friedman. By the way, here is a copy of that Pashkevil that went out against Rav Nosson Tzvi Friedman, signed by Rav Yosef Tzvi Halevi of Tel Aviv Yaffa, Rav Pinchas Epstein of the Eder Chareidus, and Rav Wozner of Bnei Brak. And I've actually put together a photo of all 3 of them. I don't have a photo of them all together in the same room, and I doubt, in fact, that they were ever together in the same room. Anyway, in the Pashkevil, Rav Yosef Tzvi Halevi wrote in the letter, I'm going to read the letter. Put my glasses on for that. Hold on a minute. The letter that Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Halevi wrote was as follows. After this kuntras, this pamphlet came out with this strange psak din, this lenient ruling, shall lichbois es tanurei hagaz b'Yom Tov, allows us to put out gas fires on Yom Tov. Many people, says Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Halevi in this letter, came to ask me about it. If it's possible that you're allowed to put out these gas fires on Shabbos, or if it's forbidden. And therefore I say absolutely, without any equivocation, that it is absolutely forbidden to put out these gas fires on Shabbos. It's absolutely forbidden. You're not allowed to rely on this heter. And it is absolutely forbidden to put out these fires on Yom Tov. It's an isur. And anyone who puts out these gas fires on Shabbos, he is desecrating the holy day, and bidvar ha'osur al pi halacha, with something that is forbidden according to the halacha. That's what the letter says on this Pashkevil, which I don't have an original of. I found it online. The fact is, though, that in the other direction, the fact is that there's absolutely no reality to this letter. It's a fake and it's a forgery. Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Halevi, who was a holy man, he was one of the holiest Jews of his time. He was the Rosh Bezdin in Tel Aviv, in Yaffa. He was a very special man. He was one of the great poskim of his day, and he wrote a letter. I have a copy of the letter. I don't think I printed it out, but hopefully when we have this, when we put out the video of this Zoom, the letter will appear on your screen. I'm now going to read you the letter as you look at the original letter on the screen if you're watching the video on YouTube. Lichvoid Harav Agon Reb Nosson Tzvi Friedman Ner Yoy Rab Bnei Brak Shikun Hey. Hineni l'hoidioi ki af pam lo ra'isi es sifroi netzer mata. I've never seen the Sefer. This is what Rabbi Yosef Tzvi Halevi says to Reb Nosson Tzvi Friedman. I've never even seen your Sefer. I don't know what they're talking about. The Gam lo has Sefer Divrei Shlomo. I've not seen the Sefer Divrei Shlomo either. Another Sefer. Shehiz kibra michtovei that you mention in your letter. Elo b'mikre bo elai anoshim. Some people came into me. I'm telling you what they are. They're troublemakers. V'sipru, and they said as follows: Ki Rav Friedman matir garam kibui b'yomtov. He allows one to, via I guess, some type of groma, to put out gas or fire on Yom Tov. Omarti lohem sh'ani eineni maskim. I said to them, I don't agree. If that's what he said, I don't agree. And when they asked me, do I allow for such a thing to be done on Yom Tov, I said, absolutely not. It's forbidden. I forbid it. Besides for what they asked me, that question, it's an obvious answer, I didn't do anything else. I never wrote anything, I never signed anything. I never said anything whatsoever to any letter that has come out in my name is an absolute forgery. Now, I've no idea if the other letters from Rav Osner and Rav Epstein are forged, but suffice to say, one must treat with great suspicion any condemnatory pashkavils, even if the pashkavil contains letters and signatures, because it's easy to forge. Now, why am I telling you about Rav Nosson Tzvi Friedman? Simple. I have a letter here from Rav Mushulem wrote to Rav Nosson Tzvi Friedman. It's dated 1956. It's a beautiful letter. It's an absolutely sensational letter. Rav Roth had sent a copy of Simchas Yomtov to Rav Friedman, and Rav Friedman sent him money in payment for the Sefer. Rav Roth says in the letter, I never wanted any money. I just wanted to send you a gift. So now I can't accept the money. And then he cites a number of Gemaras to prove his point, that it would be wrong to accept the money. As I said, it's an amazing letter. I'm so happy that I have this letter in my collection. And it's a letter from, its original Ksav Yad from Rabbi Mushulem Roth, who was a Rav. He died in 1962, and he was one of the most remarkable Rabbonim of Eretz Yisrael, and before that in Europe. Anyway, while I'm on the subject of Rav Roth, and as I mentioned earlier, his second wife was the daughter of Rav Pinchas Menachem Mendel Rubin of Seret, I would like to talk about Rav Roth's incredible brother-in-law, Rav Moshe Yosef Rubin, the Kimpelunga Rav. A few months ago, I was visiting New York, and I spent a few hours at Begeleisen, you know, the Sforim store on 16th Avenue in Borough Park. It's the place to be. I always meet good people when I'm there. I just walk up to people, anybody who's there, and ask them what they recommend among the Sforim. I want to hear what they think is good. I always get good recommendations. Anyway, you never know who you'll bump into. So there's this guy standing at the checkout. He's chatting with Aaron Mordcha Begeleisen. I say, hello, who are you? He looks at me as if I've just dropped from the moon. I mean, who's this guy interrupting his conversation with Aaron Mordcha? I'm Pinny, I said. What's your name? My name is Moshe Rubin. Aha. And what are you doing here? I'm here with a sefer I published by my grandfather and about my grandfather. I'm just showing it to Aaron Mordcha to see if they'll sell it here. Well, I said to him, you've just sold your first copy. Now, here it is. Here is the first copy of an amazing sefer by an amazing man and about an amazing man. It's called Pardes Yosef. You've got here is the title page of Pardes Yosef. That's the name of the sefer. It's an absolutely gorgeous sefer. Can you imagine this? Reb Moshe Yosef Rubin was a Chassidische Meyuchas, but he wasn't so much into Chassidische Torah. Instead, he had a fondness for the Torah of Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch. And he also was a strong believer in Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, with a clear vision of Kibbutz Golios, of the ingathering of the exiles, being something that was bringing in the Messianic era. This is the Sefer. It's a fantastic Sefer. And I have to tell you, he thought the Kibbutz Golios wasn't just an accident of Zionism. I've got some photos of Rav Rubin as well. You can find a great number of photos at the end of the book, at the biographical chapter. It's amazing. Here's a photo of Rav Rubin when he was a younger Rav, I think middle-aged, I would say. Here he is with his smoking his pipe when he was a little bit older. And he was very friendly with the Bobover Rebbe. Here is an amazing photo. This is on June the 19th, 1972, with Senator George McGovern, who was standing to be the President of the United States. Of course, he lost the election, but he visited the Bobover Rebbe. And you can see here Rabbi Rubin, who was a very close friend of the Bobover Rebbe, he's actually speaking at this event. It was reported in the New York Times. And here's another picture of Rav Moshe Yosef Rubin together with the Bobover Rebbe and other people. I've got here a picture from his grandson of him. If you don't find in the book, no pictures of ladies in the book, because the Frumma section of the Sforim buying public wouldn't buy it if there's pictures of women. But here's a picture of Rav Rubin with his wife. It's an incredible sefer. And by the way, now that I met Moshe Rubin in Bigeleisen, we're good friends in regular touch via WhatsApp. Now, I knew the name Moshe Yosef Rubin. I knew it. I knew it from somewhere. I couldn't remember where. I searched and searched. And eventually, after trawling through thousands of papers and letters, I found it. I know how I know. Here's a letter from Rav Rubin on the letterhead of his organization, the rather grandly titled Merkaz Olami Mirabonim Yotzei Europa, the World Center of European Rabbis, based in Brooklyn. This was an organization that federated all those rabbis who had been removed from their original rabbinic centers and forced to move elsewhere by the Holocaust. Look at the letterhead. I've actually increased the size of the letterhead somewhere, if I find it, because it is rather remarkable. It's really very impressive. Hopefully you'll be able to see this on the screen. Look at the names. Rav Unterman, a chief rabbi. And there's a photo of Rav Unterman with Rav Rubin in the sefer, if you buy the sefer. Rav Zalman Sorotskin is on the letterhead. We mentioned him in the last episode of Treasures. Rav Zevin, that's in Israel. In America, of Laser Silver, of Moshe Feinstein. In Canada, of Hirschsprung. It's an incredible lineup. Rav Rubin was extremely impactful during the interwar years and during the war, and immediately after the Holocaust, he did incredible work with survivors, but somehow he ran out of steam once he got to America, or at least the steam that he'd had in Europe. He brought up a wonderful family, and he did do all kinds of things that he'd done in his younger years, but the activity was reduced. He was involved in every kind of activity in America, particularly with Bobover, but with many other things as well. If you get hold of the sefer, you should try and get hold of it. Pardes Yosef, it's by his grandson, or published by his grandson. It's well worth it. An incredible tribute to an incredible man. Moving on now to something completely different. In the pamphlet I published recently, Rebel Rabbi of London, about Yosef Shapochnik, I mentioned the fact that Chief Rabbi Naphtali, or Herman Adler of England, was particularly despised by the frum immigrants from Eastern Europe. And I have to say that the loathing was not a one-way street. His father, Rav Nosson Marcus Adler, wrote a definitive commentary on Targum Onkelos called Nesina Lager. The word ger means stranger or outsider, and it is interchangeably used to describe converts to Judaism. A ger is a convert. Nesina Lager is a commentary on Onkelos, who was a convert to Judaism. The joke they used to say was this: Rav Nosson Adler is the Nesina Lager, his son Rab Naphtali is the Sina Lager, because he hates anyone who is an outsider. I have a picture of him here. This is a picture of Rabbi Dr. Herman or Naphtali Adler. And he looks as you'd expect a chief rabbi of a very anglicized, fairly assimilated community would look. And he was not somebody who was unaware of Gemara Rashi Tosfos. He'd learnt in yeshiva, and he was familiar with Drush Sforim. I don't know if he could make a laning in a difficult Tosfos in Erevin or Yevamos, but he certainly wasn't somebody who was unfamiliar with rabbinic texts. In any event, he was hated by the Haredim, but there was one group of Haredim who absolutely adored Herman Adler, the anti-Zionist Kanoim. The thing is this: as modern as he was, and as open to a forward-thinking Judaism as he may have been, when it came to political Zionism, Herman Adler was absolutely adamant. The Zionist movement, as he told everyone, was an egregious blunder. In an interview he gave for a newspaper, he said without equivocation that nobody whose opinion is of any weight believed that Palestine should be acquired by the Jewish people, or that Jews should gather there as a nation, at least until Messianic times. He was persuaded to meet with Theodor Herzl, but although he was impressed by Herzl's personality, he was not convinced by anything Herzl told him. Herzl was not impressed either, and called Adler, I'm quoting him now, a man from Germany who would undoubtedly like to think of himself as a descendant of the Anglo-Saxons. In 1898, Herman Adler gave a speech at the North London Synagogue, part of a series of speeches. It was later published as a pamphlet, which I have to tell you is extremely rare. I have a copy, the copy is here. The speech was titled Religious versus Political Zionism. This is what he said. I look at this movement and worry with my heart, since I see it as opposed to the Torah of Hashem. That's what he said in the speech. He had 4 objections to what he referred to as political, secular, or Basel Congress Zionism. The first objection was theological. He said that the ideal way for Zionism was messianic, and we should wait for the Messiah. Don't become a Zionist now before Mashiach comes, wait for Mashiach. The second was sociological. Supporting Zionism, he said, would divert attention from real problems facing Jews. It would cause anti-Semitism. It would encourage accusations of dual loyalty. That was the second objection. The third objection was what he called definitional. By having a nationalist movement, Zionists were giving what he called the false impression that Jews are a nation. The fourth reason he opposed Zionism was pragmatic. The world would just laugh at ridiculous dreamers who talked about founding a Jewish state. None of this was particularly original. Zionism was opposed by many different types of Jews, and particularly Jewish leaders, both who were completely assimilated and very religious, who had all types of fears of the impact of political Zionism. In 1900, just 3 years after the first Zionist Congress in Basel in 1897, a book was published in Warsaw called Meah Shearim. The publishers were anti-Zionist activists based in Kovna, Lithuania. Rav Shlomo Zalman Landau and Rav Yosef Rabinovich, both leaders of the infamous Lishka Shchira that was founded by Rav Yaakov Lipschitz, the personal secretary of Rav Yitzchak Hachanan Spector. This book, Meah Shearim, here it is. It's also extremely rare. Here's the title page. This book, Meah Shearim, look at it. It's an incredible collection. It's extremely rare. It's a collection of a well-articulated, firm rejection of Zionism, which the authors contended was just another version. That's what they said, another version of Reform Judaism. Meah Shearim also contains dozens of letters from they're condemning Zionism, written by a broad spectrum of the most prominent rabbonim, rabbis of the era, including, for example, Rav Chaim Soloveitchik of Brisk and Rav Sholem Dov Ber Schneerson of Lubavitch, all of whom had reached pretty much the same conclusion, that Zionism was bad for the Jews. I'm not going to get into that debate right now. Perhaps I'll do it. I'll do a talk on that particular subject in the future. But imagine this. Alongside letters from Reb Chaim Brisker and the Lubavitcher Rebbe was this letter. Here we have it. A letter in Lashon HaKodesh from Chief Rabbi Herman Adler, the scourge of frum immigrants who fought frum Rabbonim tooth and nail. And there was also a full transcript of his speech, his anti-Zionist speech at the North London Synagogue. Unbelievable. If only the readers would have known who he was, I bet they would not have been too happy to have his words included in a sefer that they had in their homes. But this was in the days before social media and the information superhighway, so there he was, there he is, Rav Naftali Adler, in Sefer Meah Shearim. Anyway, while we're on the subject of anti-Zionists, you might have heard of a man called Moshe Hirsch, the New York-born leader of one of the factions of the anti-Zionist Neturei Karta group in Jerusalem. Here's a photo of him with Yasser Arafat, Yamach Shmoi. Hirsch was Arafat's Minister of Jewish Affairs, official advisor on Jewish affairs after the Oslo Accords, and he visited Ramallah on several occasions after Arafat established himself there. The point is this. I always think if you want to take on an extreme religious position, you have to be completely beyond reproach. Like whiter than white. No excuses, right? Hirsch is no exception to that rule. So imagine my surprise when I discovered this pamphlet in which Hirsch delivers an account of his petty dispute with the Vad Meah Shearim over construction work that he claimed would result in the loss of communal space in some residential area of Meah Shearim, and really it would affect his back garden. He claimed that the construction contravened regulations laid down by the founders of the neighborhood. It's all so sordid and trivial, it's really quite pathetic. Hirsch reproduces, you can look at the pamphlet here, he reproduces all kinds of letters and documents and facsimiles of all the correspondence and documentation relating to the dispute. And what struck me most was this. He writes that during the dispute, he was physically attacked and left in a terrible state. As a result of the attack, he became blind in one eye. I always thought that he was attacked and blinded by some Zionist zealot. After all, Hirsch spent his life calling all Zionists violent murderers. It turns out he was attacked and blinded not by some Zionist thug, but by one of his own thugs. How ironic. Now, one last piece. Actually, I have two last pieces. Photos of Rav Kook's yeshiva, Merkaz Harav, during the 1920s. I don't know if any other copies of these photos actually exist, but you can see in the photo Rav Yaakov Moshe Charlap and the Nozir, and of course of Avram Aaron HaKohen Burstein, the founder of Merkaz Harav Yeshiva. He was the first Rosh Yeshiva. Also some very interesting names among the Bochrim on one of the photos, in which all the Bochrim are named. For example, there's a Pritzker, there's a Don Yichya, there's a Dmitrovsky, there's an Elboim. These are all very familiar names, and someone, I think, needs to do the research to find out who all the Bochrim were and where they came from and what happened to them, because this is an incredible yeshiva. It was the foundation of the Frum Zionist community in Eretz Yisrael. Not Frum Zionists living in Europe, but Frum Zionists in Eretz Yisrael. Notably absent on either photo is Rav Hutner, although he was at Merkaz Harav when the Hebron massacre took place. And that's also a story for another time. Anyway, this concludes this episode, this final episode of Treasures from the Rabbi's Library. and the series, perhaps the series in general, at least for the moment. After the winter break, I will return, as I said earlier, with a new series of Jewish history lectures. The first one will be titled Rogues, Rascals and Rapscallions. More episodes from the margins of Jewish history. I have amassed quite a collection, as you already know, of rogues, rascals and rapscallions, and I can't wait to share them with you. But until then, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for allowing me to share all the treasures that I have shared with you so far. Hope to share many more with you in the future. Until next time, shalom and thank you.